It was 3 in the morning when Richard Sterling's sharp voice echoed through the sleek, empty penthouse. His words sliced through the silence as he descended the grand staircase, his silk pajamas stark against the cold marble floors. Richard's empire of real estate and power had given him everything he could ever want: luxury, influence, and a world that revolved around his every move. At 42, he was a man who controlled the city, his name spoken in reverence by the elite. But there was one thing he hadn't yet conquered: understanding the people he looked down upon. The woman before him, Keisha Williams, was inconspicuous at first glance. She was a 26-year-old cleaning lady, one of the many hired to maintain his sprawling penthouse. Yet at this moment she wasn't cleaning. Instead, she sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by books with a small flashlight illuminating the pages of advanced calculus. She had finished her shift hours ago, yet here she was, studying in the very place Richard called home, as if the penthouse was her private study. Richard's face twisted in irritation. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, his words sharp and laced with disdain. Keisha looked up slowly, her calm expression never faltering. She didn't flinch or cower under his gaze. She was simply there, studying, focused, undeterred. She had been working here for months, keeping her head down, doing her job diligently. But tonight was different. Tonight she had finally found a moment to feed her curiosity, her ambition. She had quietly observed the world of the rich and powerful, learning things no one expected her to understand. "I'm done cleaning," Keisha responded, her voice steady. "I was just taking a moment to study before heading home." Richard scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. "Study? You? Do you have any idea where you are?" He waved his hand around the room as if the opulence of his surroundings should intimidate her. "This isn't a public library. It's my home, and I pay you to clean, not to play student." Keisha closed the calculus book slowly, her fingers lingering on the worn pages. There was something about the way she moved, deliberate, composed, unhurried. As she stood up gathering her books, she didn't let his words rattle her. Instead, she met his gaze directly, her expression calm, almost serene. "With all due respect, sir," she said, her voice carrying an edge that surprised Richard. "The house is spotless. I've finished my work. I was just taking a moment to learn, to better myself." Richard's anger flared. A cleaning lady daring to dream beyond her station? It was a line he couldn't ignore. But as she walked past him, her steps purposeful, her demeanor unchanged, Richard felt a flicker of unease. He was used to people submitting to his power, to being the one who commanded, but Keisha wasn't submitting, and that stirred something he couldn't quite place. Before she reached the door, Keisha stopped. She turned back to him, a faint smile playing on her lips, a smile that left Richard with a strange, inexplicable feeling. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her words lingering in the air. "Have you ever heard the saying, 'Don't underestimate those who are always watching'?" As the door closed softly behind her, Richard stood frozen, unsure of what had just transpired. He watched her walk away, the words hanging in the air. This was far from over. The next morning, Richard couldn't shake the image of Keisha's calm face from his mind. As he walked into his office in his sleek Manhattan penthouse, he found himself mulling over her words, the tone of her voice and that look. Calm, unflinching. He had made a mistake, he thought. A mistake he would fix. He spent the day buried in meetings, focusing on the deals that had made him one of the wealthiest men in the city. But as the evening drew near, the image of Keisha studying in his home kept nagging at the back of his mind. He dismissed it at first, shaking his head. People like her don't belong in places like this. But when his personal assistant, Janet, came into the office later that afternoon, the topic was unavoidable. "Mr. Sterling," Janet said cautiously, handing him a file. "The cleaning company called. They want to know why Keisha Williams was fired. She was their top-rated employee." Richard paused, looking at her, his eyebrows furrowing. "Top-rated? You mean she's the best of all the cleaners?" Janet nodded, adding, "Yes, apparently she's not just reliable but goes above and beyond, always a step ahead. They said her evaluations have been outstanding." Richard's annoyance flared. Why would someone like Keisha, a cleaning lady, be the best? His mind raced with irritation. He had fired her for daring to study in his penthouse, for thinking she was more than just a cleaner. "Don't waste your time with that," Richard snapped, slamming the file on the desk. "She wasn't following the rules. It's that simple. Janet hesitated for a moment, sensing Richard's frustration. "Sir," she started, "could you at least hear the whole story? I think you're misunderstanding her intentions." Richard shot her a look that shut her down. "I said drop it, Janet." She left, but as she walked out, Richard's thoughts wandered back to Kesha. Was she really more than just a cleaning lady? That night, as he sat down to eat his dinner in his penthouse, his phone buzzed. It was an email notification from one of his business associates, but the subject line caught his eye. Exclusive report on Richard Sterling's real estate deals. Richard quickly opened the email. It was a link to a report that outlined his most recent deals, but as he skimmed through it, something didn't sit right. It was a brief mention, almost buried within the report. Recent business moves related to Sterling real estate have drawn suspicion due to rapid zoning changes and possible insider trading connections. His eyes narrowed. Who had written this? What was going on? A chill ran down his spine. He had been successful in covering his tracks for years, making sure no one could ever trace his real estate empire back to any shady dealings. Had someone discovered his secrets? His hand shook slightly as he clicked on the link to find the full article. The web page opened, and he saw a familiar name under the byline, Marcus Thompson. Marcus Thompson was a journalist he knew about, one who had been making waves in the media with investigations into the corrupt elite. Richard had dismissed him before, but now his eyes went wide as he read further. The article was about his business dealings, highlighting things he had worked so hard to keep hidden. His anger swelled, but so did something else, fear. He slammed the laptop shut, his mind spinning. The coincidences were starting to pile up. Kesha studying math, her presence in his penthouse, the suspicious timing of this article. It was no longer a simple mistake on her part. There was something deeper happening. Richard leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the armrest. What if Kesha knew more than she let on? What if she wasn't just an employee, but had spent months observing, analyzing, maybe even gathering evidence against him? The pieces began to click. Kesha sat at the public library that night, completely unaware of the storm Richard was brewing. While he sat in his penthouse ruminating, she sat there organizing her findings. For the past 6 months, she had methodically documented everything. Every business meeting Richard had, every slip-up, every phone conversation overheard. She knew things Richard didn't even realize. The contracts, the shady dealings, the underhanded tactics. But unlike Richard, she wasn't acting out of anger or revenge. She was preparing. Kesha's quiet ambition had led her down this path. She hadn't been naive when she first took the job at the cleaning company. She had planned every step, learning everything she could, studying the documents she had access to, all while pretending to be a simple cleaning lady. Tonight, as she pieced together the final pieces of her investigation, a voice broke through her concentration. It was Marcus Thompson. "I've been investigating Richard Sterling for months," he said, approaching her table. "And I heard you used to work for him." Kesha looked up slowly, studying him. She wasn't surprised by his approach. She knew he'd eventually find her. But now that he was here, it was time to take action. Kesha closed the laptop in front of her and looked across the library's quiet expanse. The small fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, but they felt distant compared to the weight of what she was preparing. The months of silent observation, the small acts of rebellion in the penthouse, and the quiet accumulation of evidence had all led to this moment. Kesha wasn't just a cleaning lady anymore. She had transformed into the weapon that could take down a man who had built his empire on the suffering of others. Marcus Thompson's appearance had caught her off guard, but she knew this was the beginning of something far bigger than either of them had realized. As she turned to face him, she found his eyes filled with an intensity that matched her own. He was the link she had been waiting for, someone who could amplify the information she had spent months collecting. "You've been working inside his empire for months," Marcus began, lowering his voice as he took a seat across from her. "You have access to documents, transactions, everything we need to bring this man down." Kesha's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "Not just his empire, Marcus. I've watched him build it from the inside. The bribes, the deals, the lies, it's all been meticulously organized. I've just been taking notes, waiting for the right moment to strike." Marcus leaned forward, eyes wide with a mix of admiration and disbelief. "How much do you have?" I mean, how much is enough to take him down? Her hands rested on the table, fingertips tapping gently as she thought. I've got enough to expose his whole operation. Documents, records, insider information, bribe offers. I've kept everything in order. It's all here in this notebook. She gestured toward a worn leather binder she had kept hidden in her bag. And these, she continued, pulling out a stack of photographs and contracts, prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Richard Sterling built his fortune on fraud, insider trading, and money laundering. Marcus couldn't hide his amazement as he sifted through the neatly organized pile of evidence. Jesus, Kesha, this is bigger than anything I've ever come across. If we get this into the right hands, we will, Kesha interrupted. But it's not enough just to have the evidence. We need to make sure it's airtight. I've already reached out to a few contacts who can help with that. We'll need the right timing, the right leverage. Her voice was steady, almost too calm for someone who was about to turn their entire life upside down. But Kesha had learned to embrace this unshakable certainty, the belief that justice was not just about punishment, but about restoring the balance that men like Richard Sterling had disrupted. Marcus paused, looking at her with newfound respect. How did you do all of this, Kesha? How did you stay so controlled? You must have known the risks. Kesha's eyes softened slightly as she took in the question. I did know. I grew up in the same neighborhood as you, Marcus. I've seen how people like Sterling treat people like us. How they look at us like we don't matter. But I had something he didn't, patience. I had the time, the smarts, and the drive to make sure that when I acted it would be unstoppable. I wasn't just collecting evidence, I was collecting the future. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in before she continued. Every time Richard made a decision that hurt someone, he made the mistake of underestimating me. People like him think they can control the world with money and power. But in the end, it's the people they ignore, the ones they look down on, who hold the key to their undoing. Marcus gave a short nod of understanding. I get it now. You weren't just planning to expose him. You were preparing to make his downfall inevitable. Keisha's eyes darkened with resolve. Exactly. He thought I was just a cleaning lady, a nobody. But now I've got everything I need to make him a nobody, just a stain in the history books. A cautionary tale for the next generation of rich men who think they're untouchable. Richard Sterling spent the next few days completely oblivious to the storm building around him. After his initial anger at Kesha, his life had returned to its usual routine. He had investors to impress, deals to close, and parties to attend. The world for him remained a stage where he was always the star. He had no idea that a simple cleaning lady, who by all rights shouldn't have been able to even enter his world, was plotting his downfall. But in the back of his mind, something gnawed at him. What if Kesha wasn't just a cleaning lady? It was a thought that wouldn't leave him alone, no matter how hard he tried to push it aside. That afternoon, as Richard sat in his penthouse overlooking the skyline, he received a call from his lawyer, Richard Phillips. The tone in his voice was urgent, sharp. Mr. Sterling, we've got a problem. There's been an anonymous tip, and it looks like someone's been digging into your business deals. We need to act fast. Richard's stomach sank. What do you mean, someone's digging into my deals? He demanded, his fingers gripping the edge of the desk. The media, Phillips continued. There's been talk of some shady contracts, possible insider trading. The press is starting to connect the dots. They've also been asking about a cleaning lady who worked in your penthouse. Richard's blood ran cold. Kesha Williams, he muttered under his breath. His mind raced. Could she have been the one? No one knows for sure, Phillips continued. But we need to control the narrative before it gets out of hand. I'll prepare a statement for the press, but you need to handle this personally. That night, Richard found himself restless, unable to sleep. He couldn't stop thinking about Kesha and the events that had unfolded in his penthouse. Had she been studying calculus just to throw him off track? Or had it been something more? His doubts festered, and his arrogance began to crack. Meanwhile, Kesha sat at her desk in the library, carefully compiling the final pieces of evidence she had gathered. Her phone buzzed and she glanced at the message. It was from Marcus. It's time. We're publishing tomorrow. A small, knowing smile crept across Kesha's face as she read the message. This was it. She stood up, looking out the window at the bustling city streets below. For the first time in months, she felt the weight of everything she had worked for come to fruition. She wasn't just about to ruin a man's life. She was about to show the world that no one is untouchable. Not even Richard Sterling. The morning was crisp, the city waking up to its usual hum, yet Richard Sterling sat in his penthouse, unable to shake the gnawing sense of foreboding that had taken root in his mind. The sound of the city outside, the hum of cars and people rushing to their next destination felt distant, as though it was all happening in another world. Inside, everything seemed to be in its usual place. His desk, the sleek furniture, the towering windows that provided a view of Manhattan's skyline. But Richard felt disconnected. His thoughts kept drifting back to the cleaning lady, Keisha Williams, and that night she had caught him off guard with her confidence, with the quiet knowledge in her eyes that unsettled him more than anything else. What had she known? How had she seen through him when no one else had? The thought of her, calm and unflinching as he tried to intimidate her, irritated him to his core. She was just a cleaning lady, for God's sake. She shouldn't have been able to outsmart him. She shouldn't have been able to understand the depths of his business dealings, or worse yet, to have been watching him with such quiet intelligence. Richard's cell phone rang, cutting through the tension in the air. It was Marcus, his assistant, and Richard's first instinct was to answer quickly. It had been a long time since he had felt this unease, this weight in his chest like a storm waiting to break. Maybe Marcus had some good news. Maybe he had finally found a way to deal with whatever Kesha was planning. "Mr. Sterling, we have a problem." Marcus's voice crackled through the line. Richard's heart skipped a beat and he sat up straighter in his chair. "What kind of problem?" he asked, his voice sharp, betraying none of the fear that was beginning to build within him. "It's the press. They've already got wind of something. We don't know how, but they're starting to make connections. Your business practices, your dealings, someone's been digging and it's got their attention. We need to talk strategy." Richard's mind raced. This can't be happening. "I don't want any press getting near this," Richard snapped, his fingers running over his smooth marble desk. "Get them under control. Do whatever it takes." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Marcus hesitated before speaking again. "There's something else, sir. They're asking about a cleaning lady who used to work for you, Kesha Williams, the one who was fired last week. I did some digging and—" "What?" Richard's voice cracked as he shot to his feet, knocking the papers on his desk. "What's she got to do with this?" "I don't know yet, sir. But I found a couple of interviews with people who worked with her at the cleaning service. One of them said Kesha used to be an economics major. She might have more knowledge than we gave her credit for." Richard's thought slammed into him like a tidal wave. She's more than just a cleaning lady. He could feel his pulse quicken, his body tense. There was no way she could have uncovered anything. But something about the way Marcus was speaking made him think otherwise. He'd underestimated her. That was a mistake he couldn't afford to make again. "I don't want her name mentioned again," Richard said, his voice dangerously low. "She's nothing. Just some low-level employee trying to stir up trouble. But if she's got anything on me, I want it gone. Understood?" "Understood, sir. I'll handle it." Marcus hung up the phone. Richard sat back down, his hands trembling slightly. The scotch on his desk seemed suddenly more appealing than the problems swirling in his mind. He poured himself a drink, feeling the burn slide down his throat. It didn't help. Nothing helped. Meanwhile, across town, Kesha sat at the public library, her laptop screen glowing in front of her. It had been a week since the confrontation at Richard Sterling's penthouse. Since that night, she had taken meticulous care to stay under the radar. She knew the danger that came with having such explosive evidence, and she needed to be smart. Marcus had been right, timing was everything. But she wasn't just going to expose him. She was going to destroy him. As she sifted through the evidence she had carefully collected over the past 6 months, she felt a deep satisfaction. The things she had witnessed, the deals she had seen happen right under Richard's nose, none of it was a fluke. It was the result of months of silent patience, weeks spent watching, listening, and documenting. Her economics degree from State University had given her the technical knowledge to understand the complex financial schemes at play. What Richard hadn't realized was that by underestimating her, by treating her like a disposable part of his household, he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Her cell phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was Marcus. "All set," he said. "We're going to publish everything next week. The documents, the recordings, the photos, it's all lined up for the front page." Kesha closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The storm was coming and there was no stopping it now. Next week, Kesha repeated softly. We do this right. No mistakes. She paused, looking down at her phone, feeling a surge of determination. Richard won't see us coming. The week passed slowly for Richard. The mounting pressure began to take its toll. No matter how many meetings he attended, no matter how many deals he closed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His phone buzzed relentlessly with calls from his lawyers, his accountants, and even some of his most trusted associates. There was a sense of urgency building around him, one he couldn't escape. Every time he walked past the window, his mind wandered back to Kesha. Her face, that enigmatic smile, the quiet confidence she exuded, it haunted him in a way he couldn't explain. And the worst part? He couldn't figure out how she had pulled it all off. He took another swig of scotch. This ends now. As the day arrived, Kesha sat in front of her laptop, reviewing everything one final time. There was no turning back now. She had spent months preparing for this moment, and now, it was finally time to see the fruits of her labor. With the click of a button, the article went live. The headline flashed across the screen in bold, glaring letters. Millionaire empire built on bribes and fraud. Exclusive report reveals corruption scheme. Kesha leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the screen. She knew it was only a matter of time before Richard Sterling's world came crashing down. And this time he wouldn't be able to buy his way out of it. The morning that followed was filled with chaos. Richard Sterling's phone rang incessantly as news outlets began to pick up the story. The media storm was immediate, relentless, and unforgiving. The front page of the city's largest newspaper carried the headline Kesha had carefully orchestrated. Every word, every accusation, every piece of evidence was laid bare for the world to see. Richard tried to hold it together, but he could feel the ground beneath him shift. The empire he had built with blood and sweat was crumbling, and it was all thanks to the woman he had dismissed as nothing more than a lowly cleaner. The day Richard Sterling had feared finally arrived. His world, once built on years of manipulation, power, and deceit, now teetered on the brink of collapse. The front page of the city's largest newspaper had laid bare his criminal empire. His phone continued to ring, but the calls were no longer from clients or investors. They were from reporters, lawyers, and the very people who had once admired him for his ruthlessness. Richard sat in his penthouse office, staring blankly at the screen. The words on the front page were like a hammer striking his chest, each accusation, each detail like a nail in his coffin. His breath was shallow, his hands trembling as he reached for his phone. He picked it up, dialed his lawyer's number, and waited. "Mr. Sterling, I've been trying to reach you." His lawyer's voice came through, frantic. "The authorities are already investigating the claims. They've frozen your assets and the IRS is moving in. You need to cooperate or this could get much worse." Richard felt his heart sink. He had always been untouchable, a man who could control the world with the stroke of a pen, with a well-placed bribe or the right information. But now the world had turned on him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "I'm going to need time," Richard muttered, his voice weak. "I need to think. Let me handle this my way." But his lawyer was already speaking over him. "You don't have time, Richard. The media is already reporting on the investigations. This is only going to escalate. If you don't take immediate action, your entire empire will be gone." The call ended with a sharp click, leaving Richard to stare at the phone in his hand. His entire life, everything he had worked for was unraveling before his eyes. And it was all because of Kesha Williams, the cleaning lady he had so arrogantly underestimated. Across the city, Kesha sat in a small cafe, watching the unfolding events with a quiet satisfaction. She had spent the last several days working alongside Marcus Thompson, compiling every scrap of evidence she had gathered during her 6 months working for Richard. The documents, the recordings, the photos, all of it was meticulously organized. And now it was all out in the open. Her mother, Barbara, had been the first to notice the change in her daughter. Kesha, usually reserved and patient, had become laser-focused on her mission. Every night she worked late into the hours reviewing the evidence, preparing for the moment when it would all come together. Barbara had been concerned. "Kesha, you've been so focused lately. Are you sure this is the right way? The risks." But Kesha had always known the risks. She had grown up in a world where nothing was handed to her. Everything she had achieved, she had fought for. Her degree, her work ethic, and her unyielding determination were the only things that had allowed her to get as far as she had. But Richard Sterling, he had made the mistake of thinking that someone like her could never threaten his empire. And now, he was about to learn the hard way. Back in his penthouse, Richard sat, the weight of the world on his shoulders. The phone continued to ring, but he didn't answer. Every time he heard the loud, insistent buzz, it only reminded him of how much he had lost. His fortune, his reputation, and worst of all, his control over everything. He had thought he could intimidate Kesha, that she was just another faceless employee, someone to be dismissed at will. But now she had turned the tables on him, exposing his lies and crimes to the world. It had all been so carefully orchestrated, so methodical. It was almost like she had been playing him all along, biding her time until she had gathered enough to bring him down. He leaned forward, placing his face in his hands. His thoughts were a chaotic mess. How had she managed to do this? How had someone he considered so insignificant turned out to be the one person who could destroy everything he had built? Suddenly there was a knock at the door. Richard looked up, startled, his heart pounding. He wasn't expecting anyone, not at this hour. "Come in," he called, his voice strained. The door creaked open, and to his surprise, it was Kesha who stepped into the room. She was no longer the cleaning lady he had humiliated weeks ago. She was different now, confident, poised, and dressed in a sharp business suit that made her look every bit the professional. "You?" Richard breathed, his voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "What the hell are you doing here?" Kesha smiled, the same enigmatic smile that had once unnerved him, but now it was different. It was knowing, victorious. "I thought you might like to know," she said, walking over to his desk and placing a thick envelope in front of him. "This is the information that will end your career, Mr. Sterling. You might want to take a look before you try to spin this any further." Richard stared at the envelope, his stomach turning. His mind raced as he tried to piece together how she had done it. How had she gotten all this evidence? How had she exposed him so completely? Kesha's eyes locked with his, her voice steady and calm. "You can try to deny it, Richard, but the truth is out there now. All the lies, all the manipulation, it's over. The world will know who you really are." Kesha turned and walked out of the room, leaving Richard alone with the envelope that contained his fate. As she left, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. About showing the world that no matter how powerful someone seemed, they could still fall. And in that moment, as Richard Sterling's empire began to crumble, Kesha knew she had made the right choice. This was only the beginning. Richard Sterling sat in his penthouse office, staring at the envelope Kesha had left behind. His hands shook as he carefully opened it, the weight of his arrogance and mistakes crashing down on him. Inside there were files, photos, and documents detailing every illegal transaction, every fraudulent deal, and every bribe he had ever taken. His empire, the one he had built by trampling over people like Kesha, was now laid bare for the world to see. The room was silent, save for the hum of the city outside. Richard's mind raced, but no matter how fast he thought, there was no way out. He had built his life on lies, and now the truth was staring him in the face. The money laundering schemes, the insider trading, the corrupt city officials, it was all there. His wealth, his influence had all been built on a foundation of deception. Suddenly the phone rang, breaking his train of thought. He almost didn't want to answer, but he knew he had no choice. "Mr. Sterling." The voice on the other end of the line was cold and professional. "This is Agent Harris with the FBI. We need to speak with you about an investigation involving your company. You're requested to come in for questioning." Richard's stomach dropped. The truth he had worked so hard to bury was finally surfacing. The empire he had carefully constructed was crumbling, piece by piece. He had been a titan in the business world, feared and respected by many. But now he was nothing more than a man on the verge of losing everything. As he hung up the phone, he sank into his chair, staring blankly at the documents Kesha had left. The humiliation, the regret, it all hit him at once. He had destroyed his relationship with his son, Michael, and now his own empire was slipping through his fingers. And all of it had been brought about by a cleaning lady he had underestimated. Richard's thoughts drifted to Kesha. She had been nothing more than an invisible cog in his world. But now she was the one who had exposed him. She had taken everything he had built and shattered it with a quiet, strategic vengeance. His door opened and his assistant entered, her face pale. Mr. Sterling, the media is already picking up on the story. You need to prepare for a public statement. Your name is all over the news. Richard stood up, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. He looked out the window at the sprawling city he once ruled. It no longer seemed so invincible. The fortress he had built was gone, and in its place he saw nothing but the ashes of his own making. Kesha had won, and there was nothing he could do to change that.